I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And so
Yeah.
I may not agree with what I publish, and I have disclaimers about that, but I want people to express themselves in a way that's free.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freedom Feature. I'm your host, Barry Bussey. With me today, I have Scott Ventureyra. Scott is an individual who's thinking very deeply about the issues that we're all facing right now. And if you've listened to the first part of our conversation, you will understand why. Scott, thank you for being with us again.
Well, thank you for having me back, Barry. It's a pleasure.
Just in my first conversation with you, I can tell right away that you're a very intelligent young man. You're an individual who thinks deeply about what's happening in the world. You're speaking out. And I'm wondering if you could just share with the audience a little bit about your own experience, your own journey.
Sure. I studied economics initially. I got an undergrad in economics, and then I decided to go back to university and study some theology and philosophy. And so at the time, I wouldn't say I was an atheist, but maybe an agnostic. And then throughout my studies, I became a deist because I was convinced by certain arguments for God's existence. So up until, completing 60% of my doctorate, I would consider myself still a deist at that point.
Mm.
And so it was kind of a fascinating thing because one of the reasons I came back to my faith was from having conversations with the father of an ex-girlfriend years ago. I actually thank him in the acknowledgement of the my book on consciousness.
Mm.
And so we had many discussions that I found fascinating, but he kind of led me back through these discussions, but not immediately. So, I was resistant, but some of these conversations and some of the seeds he planted led me back to my faith. He's Pentecostal. He was a Pentecostal minister at one point, but so I returned to my Catholic faith. So I rededicated myself to my Catholic faith in 2014. And what was interesting in this period, when I was, about 3 years away from completing my doctorate in theology, is that my eyes started to become unveiled to much of the troubling aspects of our culture. And
Mm.
so this awareness started to increase, and I was alarmed by the wide acceptance of moral relativism, which for those that might be unfamiliar in the audience is just a fancy term for the position that morality is subjective and akin to basically preferences like deciding between a meal at McDonald's or Burger King. Big moral decisions can be reduced to that under moral relativism.
Right.
Maybe that's a little bit crude, but it's just to give the audience, some clear examples of how pernicious this view of moral relativism can be. My eyes open even wider as I learned more about the lunacy, the gender and transgender ideology, the indoctrination of students throughout their schooling, whether at the elementary or the high school or even the university level, and also the incessant attacks on the unborn and the gradual normalization of pedophilia, which I see happening more and more,
Mm.
and the promotion of sexual immorality and a host of other issues. So prior to all of this, I was just focused more on issues related to theology and science, on questions of creation and evolution and intelligent design. That's kind of also what precipitated me to want to study philosophy and theology. I was just fascinated by questions about evolution and the existence of God, the relationship between science and religion. But you could say it was kind of a gradual buildup of discontents that led me to the position I situate myself now. So I started publishing articles and presenting on political and cultural issues.
And where would you publish these, Scott?
It started off with newspaper publications, just small opinion pieces,
Mm.
things like I wrote for the National Post, for the Ottawa Citizen, the Time Colonist, the Ottawa Sun. I remember writing one for even the Toronto Star.
Mm.
And it was on Bill Nye and the Ken Ham debate. on the creation evolution debate, and I was critical of both sides because it kind of pinned Christian fundamentalist position against some atheistic scientific materialist position, even though there's a panoply of positions in between the two. So I wrote something that was critical about that, and that became a blog eventually when I found out somebody was criticizing that article and completely misrepresenting me online. So it's actually going to be included in the revamping of my website. So I've been re-adding some of the blogs that I've written in the past and a lot of the articles. I also published a lot in the series of Catholic magazines like Crisis Magazine in the US. And I published something recently on creation and evolution. There was a debate about that. And I wanted to focus on something called the intelligibility argument and this other thing called the privileged planet notion that we're situated in a part of the spiral galaxy in the Milky Way where we have a fascinating connection between observability and habitability. So I wanted to make a point of commonality between there were two Catholics, a creationist, a young earth creationist, and then there was, I guess you could call him a neo-Darwinist. He didn't want to say he was a theistic evolutionist, but I wanted to bring some commonality between the two, that they acknowledge that God is the sovereign creator and sustainer of the universe, and then provide some arguments that both creationists and evolutionists can agree upon, because I find it's quite an emotional subject for many, biological evolution, right? So it touches
Mm-hmm.
on the aspects of the human person, as we discussed with things related to transhumanism. But so that's where my intellectual interests really lie. So on evolution and science and religion interaction and philosophy of religion, arguments for God's existence. But I felt compelled to speak up on these moral issues. And as you know, it can be rather uncomfortable because we live in a world that is ultimately subservient to evil and countless and innumerable falsehoods. So that's what kind of led me into the trajectory I find myself involved in to this present day. And it kind of led me to starting True Freedom Press.
That was my introduction to you and your writing. I saw a book that was published by True Freedom Press. I was really impressed by your preface and talking about truth and the importance of truth. And it's something that I've been working on myself in the last little while and going to be doing some presentations on. But tell us about how that came about, starting up a new press. I mean, you still think there's a way of making a go of it by starting up a press?
I'm trying my best. So I actually have, my first, I guess you could say my first client was Rick Maida, the psychologist who had troubles with Akita University years ago.
Right.
So we're actually in the process of publishing two more books in addition to a service for the people. So, Rick's been tremendously helpful for the cause of True Freedom Press. He's been very gracious. So that's a start. And hopefully, some of these ideas will catch on.
Mm.
Freedom Press, I see it as kind of this alternative publishing house for free thinkers. And so far, we published 5 books. And like I mentioned, there's going to be a couple more coming out in the next couple of months. So I'll get into the brief history of True Freedom Press
Yeah.
because, in part, it was a little bit accidental. I thought to myself, well, I should write a book, a satirical book on the presidential campaign, or rather the non campaign of Joe Biden. And so I came up with this rather lengthy title for a book about Joe Biden. It was called The Safe Bet, the 2020 Presidential Case for Joe Biden, a brilliant campaign and 47 years of unparalleled dedication to the American people. So obviously, if anybody knows anything about my positions, it's a satirical book.
Yeah.
But for the wrong reasons, people on the right were infuriated. People on the left seemed quite happy with the book, mostly because they never took the chance to examine the book or understand my position on certain issues. And so the book is purely satirical. It's in the style of Michael Knowles. I believe it was titled "Reasons to Become a Democrat." It's very similar. It's basically there's chapter headings, but most of it's comprised of blank pages. And so the bibliography is actually sourcing conservative videos and books and articles. So people that purchase this might be a bit surprised, but I got a lot of flack, I guess you could say, from people on the right or conservatives or maybe not even conservatives, people that oppose the COVID tyranny, they gave my COVID book 1 star out of 5 reviews on Amazon because of my Biden book.
Mm,
And
really?
one person said, "Go patronize somebody else." And so one of my friends that actually purchased the book, he went in and wrote a review saying you should do your due diligence and research the author a little bit before demonizing a book, either book that you've never read. So
Yeah, and
and
it's
so
all because of the title.
because of the title, exactly, and it's just pure satire. And then I decided to do another one actually at the end of this past December, and that one was titled. It was making fun of, poking fun at Trudeau and Freeland, and it was titled "Beacons of Hope: A Thorough Investigation into the Morality and Intelligence of Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland."
I saw that one and I bought it, and I'm like, what?
I wanted to just have it released right before Christmas, so free thinkers and conservatives and whatnot, libertarians could give it to their leftist-leaning relatives or friends for
But
Christmas or whatever occasion. I
yeah,
write.
I would just recommend to the audience that they not buy an e-copy of that book, because that's what I did. It was what was it, $4 or something,
Oh, I see.
and
Yeah.
then I got it and I was going through it and I said, "Oh, this is so funny," because there's so much blank pages in it. It's great for a notebook or something, but
Yes, that's what the intention was, and I think you could actually, I think on certain platforms you could actually put sticky notes in the electronic form.
oh,
What was
okay,
interesting is that I was having a lot of difficulty having it published on Amazon because they were saying that I don't have the copyright to make quotes of famous thinkers, and I said, well, hold on a second here. I publish a book on consciousness, and I quote prevalent thinkers like day in day out. I
yep.
did the same thing with the COVID book and then my making sense of nonsense. And so I said, well, what's the issue here? I basically get Klaus Schwab, Chrystia Freeland, and Justin Trudeau, in spite of themselves, to endorse the book, and which is perfectly legitimate because they actually made these utterances in public speeches. So, and contradictory ones. Were first, Trudeau supporting the truckers, and he says, give a thank you to a trucker. They're making our life easier every day throughout this horrible pandemic. And then it's like he calls the truckers and everybody associated with them, fringe minority,
Yeah.
unacceptable views, right? So I quote him in contradiction to himself in the back of the book. So just for amusement, because I tend to think that sometimes satire is a way of reaching certain people where maybe rational
Yeah.
argumentation might not reach them. It has its place.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I learned that especially through the works of people like Alan Sokal. And I'm not sure
Mm.
if your audience would be familiar with Alan Sokal. I believe he's a British physicist who wanted to test out some of these postmodern journals. And so
All right.
they called what he did the Sokal Hoax, and so he published this article that was basically covered in postmodern nonsensical language. And so it was actually published because he was praising postmodernism and all these foolish ideas, and denigrating physics and objective truth, and flattering the editorial board, and they published this
Yeah.
much to their own demise. And so I found it fascinating that satire can maybe wake up some people, and the same thing
Mm.
has happened. There's a book called Cynical Theories by I
Yes.
believe Helen Pluckrose and James
It's
Lindsay,
James Lindsay. That's right.
who's a very good thinker. He's a mathematician, but he's taken up this cross, so to speak, and he's done a tremendous job in exposing the lunacy of
Mm.
these grievance studies journals that really, like Peterson said, they have no right occupying space in academia. They're really producing nothing that's much value most of the time. I'm not going to say for every single aspect of it, but a lot of it doesn't have much value, and it's just basically getting involved with critical theory and just tying everything to this notion of either you're in one camp where you're the oppressor, or you're in the other camp where you're the oppressed. And so
Hmm.
very dichotomous view of reality that's very simplistic, to say the least. But I found the works of people like Lindsay and Pluckrose and Sokal very enlightening and necessary. So
Mm.
I'm part, I thought, maybe if I publish these books, maybe it might plant a seed in some people and show how ridiculous it is to follow some of the thought of so-called leaders like Trudeau and Freeland and saying that was the intention. The Biden book has still have copies that I'm going to be selling on my website for those who are interested once it gets running, because I have a website that'll be operational for True Freedom Press. It'll be truefreedompress.co, not .com, but .co, and I'm going to be selling all the books on there. So I'm going to re-release the Biden book, and the Trudeau and Freeland book I actually released under a satirical gag series with a picture of an icon of a clown. And so I'm going to re-release the Biden one under that series, and I'm going to have maybe an ongoing thing if people are interested in publishing books like that, because I think it has its place,
Yes,
because
yes.
sometimes ridicule and satire does have its place.
Well, I
And
mean, it goes back to the British tradition for sure of Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels, right? I mean,
yes, for sure. Yeah,
mm,
absolutely. And I'll say that aside from the satirical book, the real intention behind True Freedom Press is to promote free speech and freedom of expression.
mm,
And this is particularly true in the censorship climate that runs rampant throughout the mainstream big tech platforms like Facebook and Instagram, Google, and others. I
mm,
guess with the exception now, Twitter, since Elon Musk has taken it over with the reinstatement of a number of accounts that
hmm.
had unjustifiably been suspended, there is, an increase in freedom of expression now on Twitter, at least. Ironically, one of my friends and colleagues, Oren Amate, he's a psychologist who spoke up years ago against the administration of puberty blockers and sexual reassignment surgery for adolescents. And when Jack Dorsey was the CEO of Twitter, his account was taken down. And it
Mm,
was only until a couple of weeks ago that he was reinstated. If you can imagine, the jihadists on Twitter
yeah,
and people,
yeah.
even sometimes transgender people threatening people's lives. I've seen a few videos like that recently, and that seems to be allowed on Twitter. But somebody who's actually speaking the truth as an expert in his field about the dangers of the administration of puberty blockers and sexual reassignment surgery for those that haven't even become fully grown adults in any sense. Their minds have not evolved, or their brains have not evolved, neither have their bodies, right? So
Hmm.
I found that interesting, but at least it was reinstated recently. So there is a modicum of growing ability to express yourself somewhat freely on Twitter now. And it's interesting what's happened with the CBC and exposing the BBC and the CBC. At least he's doing some good work in that, I believe, Elon Musk, even though I'm not
Hmm.
convinced his intentions are entirely altruistic with his transhumanist projects. But we'll see. He seems to be changing the tune on that as well. For True Freedom Press, basically, I mean, the spirit of True Freedom Press, it goes back to that famous saying from Voltaire: I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And
Say,
so
yeah.
I may not agree with what I publish, and I have disclaimers about that, but I want people to express themselves in a way that's free. So this involves the idea that freedom of speech is not only a principle and a basic human right, but I see it as also a mechanism. It's an important mechanism that helps democracies survive over the centuries. I think it has an indispensable functional purpose in facilitating discussion and allowing people to debate uncomfortable ideas while considering differing and uncomfortable viewpoints. And this, in turn, I think helps us to understand reality better in society. So ultimately, I would say that free speech and freedom of expression help us sift through good and bad ideas and even expose potentially dangerous and harmful ideas instead of trying to hide them in the recesses of our minds or on the fringes of society. So I think it's important. I mean, you even have, I'm not a big fan of him, but Chomsky was for years a big advocate of free speech, and I commend him for that. And, he would say, we don't want to put Holocaust deniers on the fringes of society. We want them to be able to come to the university and speak up. One of the
Mm,
first tastes I've got of this cancel culture was when I had attended the protest just to see what they were about in University of Ottawa. I believe it was in 2010, against giving Ann Coulter a platform. I actually wrote a piece in the Ottawa Citizen related to this. And so, I wasn't a big Ann Coulter fan.
I mean, I respect some of her ideas now, but at the time, I just thought it was totally ludicrous that they were just not allowing her to freely express her ideas. And, I had suggested in my piece in the Ottawa Citizen that it's better to go and challenge her. If her ideas are so weak, they won't stand up to scrutiny.
The main reasoning behind it that was given is that she was in fear of her safety, and that's why it was canceled. So they tried to minimize the effect of the protesters. So, anyways, I think the notion that the university is place to share ideas is now a place where it's like we discourage the discussion, differing viewpoints that may be uncomfortable for so many people, but nonetheless, this is how we get a better understanding of ourselves and society and reality, in my opinion.
It seems like the universities have long passed the idea that it's like the public square where you can get out and debate and discuss ideas. Now it's basically students are told what to believe, what to understand, and all the rest. There's no willingness to allow for differences of opinion other than what is seen now as the so-called orthodox view of things. But it's an orthodoxy that we certainly don't recognize. I certainly don't recognize, even from my time years ago being in university.
It's unrecognizable to me as well from the days where I studied economics, but I saw it. I finished my doctorate in 2017, and like I mentioned, from 2014, when my eyes became unveiled, even though I had experienced that incident with the cancellation of the Coulter speech at the University of Ottawa, I still was, shocked when I started learning about, all the indoctrination that was happening at the university throughout our education system. And so it led me to write and become vocal against some of these pernicious ideas. So,
and it's extremely important that an avenue like the True Freedom Press that you have started is something to be able to open things up again. And I often wonder about universities today, just how much longer they will be able to continue. I mean, there's often, I think many of the people who are in the ivory towers of universities think, well, they're so huge and they get so much government money that they're too big to fail. But the reality is, as time is going on and as parents are recognizing and seeing what's happening to their children, when they go to these really indoctrination centers, coming out not even being able to critically think.
University, which is a very scary thought. You basically have robots coming out of these indoctrination centers that cannot analyze and think critically about any issue or with any depth. It's an unfortunate state of affairs for the evolution of our culture as well. I should say de-evolution, but yeah, it's retrograde and it's regressive. I actually talk about this in my book, Making Sense of Nonsense. Like, I suggest that, political correctness and a lot of the leftist ideologies are, they're deemed to be progressive, but they're mostly regressive.
Oh, yeah.
How Ronald Reagan spoke about, there's no left or right, it's up or down. Society is going downwards. His words are even more relevant now than back then, I would say.
Yeah,
But,
no, absolutely. Scott, our time has come again, and I want to continue one more time. And I want our viewers to take some time, have a look at True Freedom Press, and where can they find that online?
I'm revamping my personal website, which is basically scottventureyra.com, and it should be online within 2 weeks, sooner, maybe within a week. I'm in the process of uploading all of my academic articles, all of my popular pieces, other interviews that I have, my thesis defense even. So I'm trying to upload everything that I have in one centralized source or platform. And also I have the True Freedom Press website, which is going to be brand new, which offers editorial services, cover design services, ghostwriting. So a host of different services for people that may be interested in publishing a book that might need help in doing so. And so the web address for that is www.truefreedompress.co, and it's not .com but .co because the domain was already taken for .com. And I also purchased the domain for truefreedompress.ca. So if somebody goes there, it'll redirect them to .co. And so that website should be up and running within the next week, I'm hoping. So the both of them within the next couple of weeks at the latest, but within the next week I should be operational. And so people can find a lot of my work, and then they can contact me there as well. In the meantime, they could also contact me at truefreedompress@gmail.com as you reach me through this email.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you
Yes,
so much for being with us, Scott. And we do want to
thank
continue
you.
our conversation as we look at talk about the concept of truth. Okay, folks, thank you for watching us today as we've talked about True Freedom Press. We encourage you to go over there to those sites that were just, and you may not agree with the opinions expressed by our guests or by myself, but on our Freedom Feature program, we're interested in open, honest, and transparent dialogue. And until next time, I'm Barry Bussey. The fight for freedom consists not only in the legal battles in court, but also in the battle of ideas at the universities and in the media. It takes time, effort, and money to keep on top of the debates for freedom. Your donation allows us to keep fighting for all Canadians. Firstfreedoms.ca